There are people in this world who seem to carry more than their fair share of pain. People who, from the outside, appear to have everything: fame, purpose, a rare and extraordinary gift, yet whose private lives tell a story that most of us would struggle to survive. Tyler Henry is one of those people. At just 29 years old, the man America came to know as the Hollywood medium has lived through more grief, more loss, more physical suffering, and more emotional weight than most people experience across an entire lifetime. And the deeper you look into his story, the more heartbreaking it becomes. Most people first encountered Tyler Henry on their television screens, watching a calm, soft-spoken young man sit across from celebrities and deliver messages that left even the most hardened skeptics visibly shaken. He seemed almost impossibly composed for someone so young. There was something about the way he held a pen to paper, scribbling quietly as impressions came to him, that felt both mysterious and deeply sincere. Audiences connected with him immediately. But what those same audiences rarely saw, what the cameras never fully captured, was the extraordinary amount of pain that had shaped him long before any spotlight ever found him. Tyler Henry Collowan was born on January 13, 1996, in Hanford, California, a small city nestled in the San Joaquin Valley. From the very first moments of his life, the odds were already working against him. He was born prematurely, and doctors quickly discovered that he had developed a brain cyst, a condition that would quietly shadow his health for years before eventually erupting into a series of medical crises that threatened to end his life multiple times over. For a child growing up in a modest household in a small California town, none of that was visible on the surface. Tyler went to school, spent time with his family, and lived the kind of quiet, unremarkable early childhood that blends into the background of ordinary life. But beneath that surface, something unusual was already stirring. It was around the age of 10 that Tyler Henry's life began to change in a way that no child could possibly be prepared for. One morning, he woke up with a feeling he had never experienced before. It was not a dream, not a passing anxiety, and not something he could explain away with logic. It was an overwhelming and absolute certainty that his grandmother was going to die. The feeling sat in his chest like a stone. He went to his mother, Teresa, and told her what he was sensing. Teresa, understandably, did not know how to respond to her young son telling her something so alarming and so strange. She tried to comfort him, tried to move past the moment. And then the phone rang. On the other end of that call was news that stopped everything cold. Tyler's grandmother had just collapsed and passed away. The timing was not vague or approximate. It was immediate, undeniable. And for a 10-year-old boy standing in his family home in Central California, it was absolutely terrifying. That moment did not feel like a gift to Tyler. It felt like a rupture. Something had opened inside him that he did not ask for and did not know how to close. Over the following months and years, the experiences continued. He began picking up on emotional impressions from people around him. He would describe details about the deceased relatives of people he had just met, details he had no logical way of knowing. At first, he kept most of these experiences private, unsure whether anyone would believe him and unsure what to believe himself. But in a small town, secrets like that rarely stay quiet for long. Word began to travel, and by the time Tyler entered his teenage years, he had already become something of an enigma in his community. A quiet, thoughtful boy who somehow seemed to know things he shouldn't. If you were hoping that his teenage years brought some relief, some normalcy, some period of simple adolescent joy, the truth is far more painful than that. High school is brutal for almost everyone. But for Tyler Henry, it was particularly isolating. His classmates did not know what to make of him. Some were fascinated in the way that people are fascinated by something they cannot explain. But far more of them were uncomfortable, dismissive, or outright cruel. He was mocked. He was avoided. He navigated hallways filled with whispers and sideways glances from people who had decided he was either strange, dishonest, or both. The community context made it worse. Hanford was a conservative, predominantly Christian town, and the idea of a teenager claiming to communicate with the dead sat uncomfortably against that backdrop. While a small number of people interpreted his ability as something spiritually meaningful, others viewed it with deep suspicion, suggesting that what Tyler was experiencing could be something dark or even dangerous. For a teenager already struggling with questions about identity and belonging, that kind of community response was devastating. Tyler has spoken openly in interviews about how those middle school and high school years were among the most painful of his entire life. Not because of the ability itself, but because of what it cost him socially, emotionally, and personally. And then there was Terry. During those same teenage years, Tyler formed a friendship that quickly became something deeper. A boy named Terry became Tyler's first love, by his own description, one of the most important people in his young life. They were close in the way that only first loves can be, the kind of closeness that feels like the whole world has suddenly contracted into one person. Tyler has described those conversations, that emotional bond, with a tenderness that makes what came next all the more devastating. Because Tyler began to feel something about Terry that frightened him profoundly. He started sensing that Terry's childhood brain cancer, which had previously been treated, was going to return. The impression was not subtle. It was strong, persistent, and deeply distressing. And faced with that knowledge, or what felt like knowledge, Tyler made a decision that would haunt him for years. Rather than stay close to Terry, rather than hold on to the person he cared about most, Tyler began to pull away. He distanced himself slowly, protecting himself from a loss he believed was coming. He has since admitted that he pushed Terry away because the premonition felt too real to ignore and the potential grief felt too overwhelming to face. Terry's cancer did return, and Terry died before reaching adulthood. The loss was shattering, but the guilt that accompanied it was something Tyler has described as almost unbearable. He had not been there. He had chosen distance over presence in the final chapter of someone he loved, and no amount of self-understanding or self-forgiveness could entirely erase that weight. It was one of the first times Tyler truly understood the darker side of whatever ability he carried. Sometimes the things he sensed did not lead him toward comfort or connection. Sometimes they led him toward impossible choices, and the weight of making those choices wrong stayed with him long after the moment had passed. Fame, when it arrived fast. By his mid-teens, Tyler was giving readings regularly to people throughout his community. By 17 and 18, the demand had grown to a point where word had reached Southern California's entertainment industry. A brief but emotionally powerful appearance on Keeping Up with the Kardashians, during which Tyler connected family members with memories of their late father, Robert Kardashian Sr., introduced him to a national audience almost overnight. The clip spread rapidly across the internet. Shortly afterward, the E! Network offered him his own show. Tyler Henry was 19 years old when Hollywood Medium premiered. Think about what that means for a moment. At 19, most young people are adjusting to college life, learning how to do their own laundry, figuring out who they want to be. Tyler Henry was sitting across from some of the most famous people in the world, carrying their grief in his hands, and doing it on camera in front of millions of viewers. The show became a sensation. Celebrities who arrived skeptical left visibly moved. Moments from the show went viral repeatedly. After just the first season, Tyler reported receiving more than 175,000 requests for private readings. That number eventually climbed into the hundreds of thousands, a waiting list so long it became almost symbolic, a monument to just how desperately people want to believe that the people they have lost are not entirely gone. But behind the composed exterior that television audiences saw, Tyler was carrying something enormous. Every reading required him to absorb the grief of a stranger and reflect it back in a form that was both accurate enough to be convincing and gentle enough not to cause further harm. He was navigating the emotional devastation of people dealing with dead parents, lost children, and relationships that had ended without resolution. He was doing this every single day, at an age when most people have barely begun to understand their own emotions, let alone those of everyone around them. The psychological weight of that work is difficult to fully imagine, and Tyler has spoken about it with an honesty that makes clear it was never as effortless as it appeared on screen. And then came the secrets, the kind that rewrite everything you thought you knew about your own family. Tyler's Netflix series, Life After Death with Tyler Henry, brought one of the most startling revelations of his personal life into full public view. For most of his life, Tyler had believed that his Mother Teresa's mother, the woman he had understood to be his grandmother, was a woman named Stella Gordy Nestle. That belief collapsed entirely when Teresa took a home DNA test, and the results came back showing no biological connection to Nestle whatsoever. The investigation that followed uncovered something deeply disturbing. Stella Nestle had apparently taken Teresa from a hospital shortly after her birth, falsifying documentation and raising her as her own daughter. Teresa had grown up with no knowledge of this. Her entire understanding of her own identity, her heritage, her biological family, had been built on a foundation that someone else had deliberately constructed around a lie. But the story did not stop there. Stella Nestle's history, when examined fully, was not just one of deception. She had been convicted of serious violent crimes, including torture and murder, and had been sentenced to multiple life terms in prison. The woman Tyler had grown up knowing in some capacity his family had committed acts of profound evil. For Tyler, this discovery struck at something particularly complicated. Here was a man whose entire public identity was built on the premise that he could connect people to answers about their past, about the loved ones they had lost, about the mysteries that death leaves behind. And yet, confronting this mystery within his own family, he found himself powerless. He later admitted with striking vulnerability that he had never received any clear spiritual connection to his biological grandmother, who had already passed. He could not access the answers for himself the way he claimed to access them for others. He was left, like everyone else, searching in the dark. Teresa went on to reconnect with biological relatives she had never known existed. The reunions were emotional, but also tinged with a grief that cannot be easily named. The grief of decades lost, of a family history that had been stolen before it ever had a chance to form. Through all of this, Tyler Henry's body was waging its own separate battle. The brain cyst discovered at birth had never fully disappeared from the equation. Shortly after turning 18, Tyler began experiencing severe headaches, the kind of pain that communicates urgency in a language the body speaks clearly when something is genuinely wrong. Doctors confirmed that the cyst had contributed to a buildup of fluid on his brain, a condition known as hydrocephalus, which was creating dangerous and escalating pressure. Without immediate surgical intervention, the situation could have become fatal. Tyler underwent emergency brain surgery. He recovered, but the medical crises did not stop there. In the period just before the global pandemic reshaped everyone's lives, Tyler suffered a collapsed lung without warning. What followed was not a quick recovery. Doctors discovered severe air leaks that made it extremely difficult to reinflate the lung, and Tyler spent weeks in the hospital fighting through one of the most physically frightening experiences of his life. He later suggested that an early and unconfirmed case of COVID-19 may have played a role in the damage his lungs sustained, though the full picture was never entirely clear. What was clear was that his body had been pushed to a limit that frightened everyone around him. And then, after recovering from that, doctors found a tumor located near the center of his brain. Another surgery, another recovery, another period of postponed live shows, worried fans, and quiet conversations behind the scenes about whether Tyler was pushing himself too hard, too fast, and at too great a cost to his own physical health. He has never pretended that the work is sustainable in the traditional sense. He has acknowledged openly that performing live readings takes a toll on his body that goes beyond ordinary exhaustion. Yet he keeps returning to the stage, keeps sitting across from strangers, and opening himself up to their grief, because he has said, repeatedly and with what reads as genuine conviction, that the work feels like the reason he is still here. It is worth pausing for a moment on that phrase. The reason he is still here. Tyler Henry has faced death in a way that most 29-year-olds have not. He has watched someone he loved die while carrying the guilt of having stepped away. He has survived brain surgery more than once. He has spent weeks in a hospital with a collapsed lung. He has discovered that a woman connected to his family was convicted of murder. He has built a career entirely around other people's grief while managing his own. At 29 years old, that is a weight that would crush most people. And yet Tyler Henry continues. He continues reading, continues touring, continues sitting in that quiet space between belief and disbelief where he has always lived. Whether you believe in what he does or approach it with profound skepticism, the biography itself is impossible to dismiss. This is not a story of an ordinary life dressed up in extraordinary packaging. This is a story of genuine, documented, repeated suffering woven together with genuine, documented, repeated survival. The tragedy of Tyler Henry is not a single event. It is cumulative. It is the 10-year-old boy who woke up knowing his grandmother was going to die and had no one to explain to him what that meant. It is the teenager who lost his first love and carried the guilt of pulling away. It is the young man who became famous for delivering answers to strangers while discovering that he had none for himself. It is the person who has undergone multiple brain surgeries and survived a lung collapse before turning 30. It is the son who watched his mother discover that her entire childhood identity had been stolen. At 29, Tyler Henry has already lived enough for several lifetimes. And perhaps that is precisely why, when he sits down across from someone who is grieving, something in his presence feels different from what you might expect. He is not performing empathy from a safe distance. He is delivering it from somewhere inside a life that has known extraordinary loss firsthand.